Today we're exploring the question, can humanism explain human morality? This is a bit of a part 2 to the last video we did on whether or not morality is objective or subjective. But if the term humanism is new to you, humanism is the idea that we people don't need God or anything beyond ourselves to define meaning and morality. Instead, we can use reason and empathy and shared values to build a moral framework. And in this view, what is good is what helps humans flourish, whereas what is bad is what harms that flourishing. So my favorite humanist, Kurt Vonnegut, he says, "I am a humanist, which means in part that I have tried to behave decently without expectations of rewards or punishments after I am dead." And this sounds great in theory, but there are some real questions that come up about whether or not this premise actually works when you live it out in everyday life. So today we're going to look at 4 challenges related to humanistic morality and see how it addresses those challenges. The first challenge to humanistic morality is that it depends on human reason, and human reason does not always agree with itself. So humanism teaches that we can determine right and wrong by using reason, by thinking carefully, by weighing the evidence, and then choosing whatever actions lead to the best outcomes, like I said before, human flourishing. But the challenge to this is that thoughtful, well-educated people regularly reach different conclusions about different moral issues. Things like whether abortion is a human right or the taking of a human life, or if euthanasia is compassionate or harmful, or if capital punishment is just or cruel, or if war is ever justified, or what counts as fairness and equality. And remember, these aren't disagreements between uninformed people. They're disagreements between, people like judges and philosophers and ethicists and scientists and doctors and lawmakers, people who have been very thoughtful and who are very well educated about the issues. So if morality depends on human reason alone, then the question has to become, well, whose reasoning is the standard since we're disagreeing? And we have to keep in mind, of course, that human reasoning isn't neutral. It's shaped by our culture and our upbringing and our experiences and our fears and our political loyalties and even our own personal interests. We all like to think that we're objective, but if we're honest, I don't think that any of us would admit that we're completely free from these influences. So if a moral system is based on reason alone, then we end up with as many moral systems as we have moral thinkers, which is just about everyone. So humanism doesn't give us a clear way to say this conclusion is right, instead of this is the conclusion that our group prefers. Conversely, for morality to be objective, it needs a foundation that does not shift every time our reasoning shifts. So something that's more stable than personal preference, something that's more stable than cultural influence, or the limits of our own perspective. A second challenge for humanistic morality is explaining where human value and human rights come from. So who counts as a human and why that person matters. So humanists often say things like, all humans matter and deserve dignity and respect and rights. And most of us instinctively agree with that, right? But when we start asking why every human deserves dignity and rights and how we decide who counts as a human with those rights, then the answers become a lot less consistent. Right? Humanists themselves hold different views on what defines a human being, what defines human value. So some say it depends on rationality, the ability to reason and make decisions or engage in complex thought. Some say it depends on consciousness or self-awareness. So, the ability to experience oneself and form preferences or have desires about the future. Others say it depends on independence or usefulness, so a person's ability to care for themselves or contribute to others or add economic value to society. And others say, it depends on whether or not you can benefit society as a whole, meaning you have value only if your existence or actions support the well-being or progress of the broader community. So depending on which definition you choose, there are certain groups who do not qualify for full dignity or full rights, like, the unborn or the elderly with dementia or people with severe disabilities or people in comas or children who haven't yet developed self-awareness or, people who cannot contribute economically for one reason or another. This is, of course, a problem because if human beings are the ones who are assigning who gets to be valuable, then our value is conditional and it can be changed or removed. So humanism wants human rights to be universal, but within its own framework, human rights only last as long as society continues to agree with them. For human rights and human dignity to be truly universal and stable, they need a foundation that doesn't rise and fall with a person's youthfulness or abilities or social standing, and then doesn't shift, when a society changes its mind. The next challenge to humanistic morality is our built-in sense of conscience. We all feel like we should do what's right, even when we don't want to. And humanism struggles to explain where this feeling of ought comes from. Because most of us don't just prefer certain behaviors, we do feel a real sense of obligation. It's not just like, I like honesty, but rather I should tell the truth. And it's not just like, I prefer compassion, it's I should help this person, even when it costs me. So humanists have explained the sense of conscience or moral obligation, saying things like, honesty keeps a society running smoothly, or cooperation leads to good outcomes, or kindness makes life better for everyone. And all of that may be true, but none of it explains why we feel obligated to act morally even when it hurts us. Because if morality is based on what helps society and promotes flourishing or improves life overall, then the moment a moral action makes our life worse, humanistic morality says that we no longer have any obligation to act morally. We would have no reason to tell the truth if a lie benefited us and we wouldn't get caught, or help someone who couldn't repay us, or defend someone unpopular if it damaged our own reputation, or sacrifice our comfort for the good of a stranger. So humanism can certainly recommend behaviors that usually lead to good outcomes, but it can't explain why we feel obligated to do the right thing when it does not lead to our own flourishing. It also means that if humans can create and define morality, then we can change it whenever we want to. So for our sense of moral obligation to make sense, it needs to come from something that is more than what benefits us and more than what benefits society, because otherwise the obligation disappears the moment doing the right thing becomes costly. Building on the question of who defines morality, the last challenge I want to cover is that in a human-made system, the people with the most power tend to end up deciding what counts as moral. Because if there's no moral authority above humans, no moral truth outside of culture or government or collective opinion, then morality ends up being defined by the groups who have the most influence at any given time. And history shows us examples of how this plays out, right? One is that groups in power regularly define what society calls moral, which makes morality, as we've already talked about, very fragile and constantly shifting. Two, people frequently disagree with those definitions, which is why we see debates and protests and petitions and even revolutions. Ordinary people are trying to correct what they believe is morally wrong. And then three, when powerful groups decide that certain people or certain groups don't matter, or that harmful actions are acceptable, humanism doesn't offer an objective standard outside of human judgment that says, hey, this is wrong, even if those in power say otherwise. In those moments, it really becomes one group's moral opinion against another's, and historically, the group with the most power usually wins, whether they're right or not. So if morality depends only on human power, then morality changes whenever power changes. We've mentioned this a couple times now, but conversely, an objective moral standard would need to come from beyond people who hold influence at any given time. Listen, this is a Christian apologetics channel, so I want to take a moment now to contrast humanistic morality with Christianity's view on morality. And the first thing is that Christianity teaches that morality is grounded in God's unchanging character. That means that moral values do not shift with time or culture or majority opinion. They are stable and objective and able to act as a tiebreaker when human opinions differ. The second thing is that Christianity teaches that every person does have human value and rights because every person is made in God's image. So our worth does not come from things like age or ability or productivity or contributions to society. Rather, it comes from God, which means that, like I said, our value and our rights do not disappear when we're young or we're elderly or we're impaired or less capable, because they are given, not earned. Next is that Christianity explains our sense of moral obligation the same way. So because we reflect God's image, we do have conscience, we do have moral awareness, and this built-in sense of what that we should do right, even when it costs us or even when no one's watching. Scripture describes this as God writing his law on our hearts. And then Christianity also gives us a foundation for resisting unjust power, giving us the ability to say, no, this is wrong, because we do believe that there is a moral standard above human authorities. And that's why we're able to see the great moral reformers in history like William Wilberforce or Frederick Douglass or Martin Luther King Jr. They didn't appeal to human consensus. Rather, they appealed to higher authority, saying all humans are made in God's image, all humans possess equal worth, and injustice violates a law above any human system. So summing this up, humanistic morality says that we can create morality without a higher power, but it does present problems because when we do this, morality becomes subjective, it changes all the time, and it's often shaped by those who hold the most influence. In contrast, Christian morality is grounded in God's unchanging character, which gives us an objective standard for truth and value and justice that is consistent throughout all times and cultures. So in the comments, if you're up for it, I would love to hear if you think humanistic morality, Christian morality, or something else best fits what we actually believe about right and wrong and how we experience morality in everyday life. Of course, if you have other questions about this topic or Christianity or Christian apologetics, you can add those to the comments too, and I will do my best to respond there or in a future video. And if you want to see more content like this, you can go ahead and subscribe, and I'll see you next week. Bye!